The Vorthan Empire had ruled the galaxy for 12,000 years. They were not cruel rulers, but they were absolute ones. Their ships moved between stars like silver ghosts, and their weapons could turn planets into ash. When they discovered the small blue world called Earth in the year 2157, they did what they had done to 100 other young species. They sent a warning. The message was simple. Humans were to stay within their solar system. They were not to expand. They were not to build ships capable of faster-than-light travel. If they obeyed, they would be left alone. If they did not, they would be destroyed. The governments of Earth received this message and argued about it for weeks. Politicians screamed at each other in closed rooms. Military leaders demanded action. Scientists tried to explain just how hopeless the situation was. Some wanted to fight. Others wanted to hide. In the end, they agreed to obey. What choice did they have? The Vorthan had shown them images of dead worlds, of species that had resisted and paid the price. Humanity was young and weak. They would stay in their cage. That was the plan, at least. Commander Sarah Chen stood on the bridge of the research vessel Horizon and looked at the stars. She was 63 years old, with gray hair cut short and eyes that had seen too much. Behind her, her crew of 40 worked at their stations, checking systems and running calculations. The ship hummed around them, its engines old but reliable, its hull patched in a dozen places. It smelled of recycled air and machine oil, of sweat and determination. Sarah had spent her whole life dreaming of the stars. As a child growing up in a small village in the mountains, she had looked up at the night sky and imagined what wonders might be waiting out there. As a young woman, she had become an astronaut, then a commander, then the leader of Earth's most secret project. She had sacrificed everything for this moment. Her marriage had ended. Her children barely knew her. She had given up everything that most people considered important. Now she was about to throw what remained away for a chance at freedom. "We're approaching the boundary," said Lieutenant Park, her navigator. He was young, barely 30, but his hands were steady on the controls. He had volunteered for this mission knowing that he might never see Earth again. "Vorthan sensors will detect us in approximately 4 minutes. Sarah nodded. She had known this moment would come. For 3 years, her ship had been officially listed as lost in a mining accident. For 3 years, they had been hiding in the asteroid belt, building, planning, and waiting. They had worked in darkness and silence, avoiding detection by both the Vorthan and their own governments. Now they were about to break the only law the Vorthan cared about. "Any regrets?" asked Dr. Marcus Webb, her chief scientist. He was a thin man with nervous hands and a brilliant mind. He had given up everything to join this mission. His career, his family, his safety, all of it. He stood beside her now, watching the stars grow closer. "Plenty," Sarah said, "but not about this." The Horizon crossed the boundary at exactly 3:47 hours. It was a small ship, barely 200 meters long, with engines that wheezed and groaned. It was not a warship. It was not even a proper exploration vessel. It was just a collection of spare parts and desperate hope, held together by determination and stubbornness, and the belief that humanity deserved better than a cage. Within minutes, the Vorthan detected them. Within hours, they sent a hunter-killer fleet. The first attack came while the Horizon was still accelerating toward the nearest star system. 3 Vorthan destroyers dropped out of faster-than-light travel and opened fire without warning. Their weapons were precise and deadly, designed to cut through shields and armor like a knife through cloth. Each destroyer was 3 times the size of the Horizon, and their crews had been fighting wars for centuries. They moved with the casual grace of predators who had never known defeat. The Horizon took 17 direct hits in the first 30 seconds. Its engines failed immediately. Its life support began to collapse as compartments were breached and atmosphere rushed into the void. 90% of the crew died before they even knew what was happening. Sarah felt the ship shudder and scream around her. She heard the screams of her people, cut short as bodies were thrown into space or crushed by collapsing bulkheads. But Sarah Chen did not die. Neither did Dr. Webb or Lieutenant Park or 7 other crew members who had been in the reinforced command center. They had planned for this possibility, not hoped for it, but planned for it. They watched on flickering screens as the Vorthan ships moved closer, scanning the wreckage with cold efficiency. The aliens moved with the casual confidence of predators who knew they had won. "They think we're dead," Park whispered. His face was pale, and there was blood on his uniform from a cut on his forehead. His hands were shaking, though he tried to hide it. "Good," Sarah said. Her voice was calm, even though her heart was pounding. "Let them think that." The Vorthan recorded the destruction of the human vessel and transmitted a report to their command. Another species had tried to break the rules. Another species had been punished. It was routine. It was expected. They did not bother to check if anyone had survived. Why would they? No one ever survived when the Vorthan decided they should die. In 12,000 years, no prey had ever escaped their hunters. That was their first mistake. For 6 weeks, the survivors drifted in the wreckage of the horizon. They rationed their air, breathing slowly and carefully, measuring each breath like it was their last. They recycled their water through systems that had never been designed for this kind of stress, watching the meters drop lower each day. They ate emergency rations that tasted like cardboard and dreamed of sunlight and fresh air, and the feeling of solid ground beneath their feet. Sarah kept them alive through sheer force of will. When the younger crew members wanted to give up, wanted to simply stop fighting and let the cold take them, she told them stories about Earth. She told them about mountains and oceans, about cities and forests, about all the things they were fighting to protect. When the older ones grew silent and distant, lost in their own despair, she gave them tasks to complete. She made them believe that rescue was coming, even when she was not sure herself. "Why do you think anyone will find us?" Dr. Webb asked one night. They were floating in the darkness, conserving power, listening to the silence of space press in around them. The temperature had dropped to the point where they could see their breath, tiny clouds of white in the dim emergency lighting. "Because we planned for this," Sarah said. "Because somewhere out there are people who knew we might fail, and those people are not the kind to give up." She was right. The rescue ship that found them was called the Defiance. It was bigger than the Horizon, but not by much. Its captain was a man named James Okonkwo, and he had been waiting at the edge of human space for exactly this moment. He had spent 3 years building his ship in secret, gathering a crew of volunteers who believed in the cause. People who had looked at the cage the Vorthan had built and decided that they would rather die than accept it. "You're alive," he said when Sarah was brought aboard. His face was a mixture of relief and amazement. He was a tall man, his dark skin marked with scars from a life spent working in dangerous places. "They told us you were dead." "Not yet," Sarah replied. Her voice was rough from weeks of recycled air, and her body was weak from malnutrition. But her eyes were bright with something that had not dimmed in all those weeks of darkness. "What's the situation back home?" James's face grew dark. "Bad. The Vorthan sent a message after they destroyed your ship. They're demanding that Earth surrender all spacecraft capable of leaving the solar system. They're giving us 1 year to comply. And if we don't, they'll sterilize the planet, kill everyone, every man, woman, and child, leave Earth as dead as Mars." Sarah should have been afraid. She should have been angry. Instead, she felt something cold and hard settle in her chest. It was the feeling she had known all her life, the feeling that had driven her to become an astronaut, then a commander, then a rebel. It was the refusal to give up, the stubborn human instinct that said no matter how bad things got, there was always something that could be done. "How many ships do we have?" she asked. 17, all hidden in different locations, all ready to fly. Then we start again. The next 5 years were the hardest in human history. The Vorthan expected humanity to surrender. They expected fear and desperation. They expected the soft, short-lived creatures of Earth to understand that resistance was pointless and that their only hope was to obey. They did not understand humans at all. Every time the Vorthan destroyed a human ship, 2 more appeared. Every time they found a hidden base, 3 more were built somewhere else. The humans were not stronger than the Vorthen. They were not smarter. Their technology was primitive, their resources limited, their lifespans brief. But they would not stop. The resistance spread across the solar system and beyond. Miners on the asteroid belt converted their ships into weapons. Scientists on Mars developed new ways to hide from Vorthen sensors. Engineers on Earth worked day and night to build faster, stronger, more resilient vessels. Families gave up their savings to fund the construction. Children grew up hearing stories of heroes who had died fighting the enemy. And leading them all was Sarah Chen, the woman who had crossed the boundary first, the woman who had survived when she should have died, the woman who refused to accept that humanity was beaten. "We're not fighting to win," she told her followers. "Not yet. We're fighting to survive. We're fighting to show them that we will never give up. And eventually they will understand that destroying us will cost them more than leaving us alone." It was a simple strategy. It was not a brilliant strategy, but it was a human strategy, born from the same stubbornness that had driven humans to cross oceans, to climb mountains, to build civilizations in the harshest places on Earth. The Vorthen had ruled the galaxy for 12,000 years. They had never faced anything like this, and they were beginning to realize that they had made a terrible mistake. Ambassador Krelvor of the Vorthen Empire stood before the High Council and tried to explain what was happening. He was 700 years old, ancient even by the standards of his long-lived species. He had served the Empire for 5 centuries, rising through the ranks until he became one of its most trusted voices. He had seen many species rise and fall. He had watched civilizations crumble and new ones emerge. But he had never seen anything like the humans. The council chamber was vast, a dome of crystal and metal that floated above the Vorthen homeworld. Light filtered through the transparent walls, casting rainbow patterns across the floor. 12 council members sat in elevated seats, their gray skin and large eyes marking them as the elite of their species. They were used to receiving good news, to hearing about conquests and victories. They were not prepared for what Krelvor had to tell them. "They are not rational," he said. His voice echoed in the chamber, carrying the weight of his confusion. "We have destroyed over 300 of their vessels. We have killed tens of thousands of their people. We have shown them again and again that they cannot win. And yet they continue." "Then we destroy their homeworld," said Councillor Thane. He was younger than Krelvor, only 400 years old, and he had the arrogance of one who had never known failure. He leaned forward in his seat, his gray hands gripping the armrests. "As we have done before, sterilize the planet, end the threat once and for all." "We tried," Krelvor said quietly. 6 months ago, we sent a sterilization fleet to Earth, 50 ships, enough firepower to burn the atmosphere away and turn the surface to glass. And they intercepted it." Krelvor paused, choosing his words carefully. He had thought about this moment many times, had tried to find a way to explain what had happened in terms the Council would understand. "Not with warships. They did not have warships capable of fighting us. They intercepted it with cargo vessels loaded with explosives, mining ships, transport haulers. Their pilots flew directly into our ships. They killed themselves to stop us." The Council was silent. Suicide attacks were not unknown in the galaxy. Desperate species sometimes resorted to them in their final moments, when all hope was lost and death was certain anyway. But this was different. The humans were not desperate in the way other species had been desperate. They were not cornered animals lashing out with their last breath. They had simply decided that they would pay any price to survive. "How many ships did they lose?" asked Councillor Thane. His voice was quieter now, some of his arrogance fading as he tried to process what he was hearing. 47. "And how many of ours?" 3, but that is not the point. Krelvor stepped closer to the council, his hands spread in a gesture of helplessness. "The point is that they knew they would lose. They calculated the odds. They understood that most of them would die, and they came anyway. They came because they believed that even a small chance of saving their world was worth their lives. Counselor Mara, the oldest member of the council, spoke for the first time. Her voice was thin with age, but it commanded attention. She had been on the council for over 1,000 years, had seen empires rise and fall across the galaxy. This is unusual behavior. We have conquered hundreds of species. None have acted like this. No, Krelvor agreed. Most species calculate their chances of victory. When those chances become too small, they surrender. They accept their fate. It is the logical thing to do. It is the rational thing to do. And these humans, they do not seem to understand the concept of surrender, or perhaps they understand it and reject it. I am not sure which is more troubling. The council discussed the matter for hours. They considered sending a larger fleet, overwhelming the humans with numbers they could not possibly resist. They considered offering the humans a compromise, some small concession that might satisfy them. They considered simply waiting for the humans to exhaust themselves, to burn through their resources and their population until there was nothing left. In the end, they chose to continue the war as they had been fighting it. The Vorthan Empire had never backed down from a challenge, and they would not start now. The humans would be crushed, eventually. It was just a matter of time. But as the years passed, that time seemed to stretch longer and longer. Sarah Chen was 68 years old now. Her hair was completely white, and her body was covered in scars from battles she should not have survived. She walked with a slight limp from an injury that had never healed properly. Her hands shook sometimes when she was tired. She should have retired years ago, should have passed the burden to younger shoulders. But she could not stop, would not stop. The fight was not over, and she had promised herself that she would see it through to the end or die trying. She stood on the bridge of the Defiance, which had been repaired and rebuilt so many times that none of its original parts remained. It was not the same ship that had rescued her from the wreckage of the horizon. It was something else now, something that had evolved through years of combat, learning and adapting like a living thing. "Status report," she said. "Vorthan fleet detected at the edge of the system," Park replied. He was older too, his face lined and tired, his hair streaked with gray, but his voice was steady and his eyes were still sharp. 12 destroyers, 2 cruisers, 1 dreadnought. And us. 23 ships, mostly converted freighters and mining vessels. Captain Okonkwo's fleet is en route, but they won't arrive for another 6 hours. Sarah looked at the tactical display. The numbers were not good. They had never been good. In 10 years of fighting, the humans had never won a fair battle against the Vorthan. They had won through ambushes, through sacrifice, through sheer stubborn refusal to accept defeat. "Open a channel to all ships," she said. "Channel open, Commander." Sarah took a deep breath. She thought about all the people who had died to bring them to this moment. She thought about the children being born on Earth right now, children who had never known a sky without fear. She thought about the future they were fighting for, a future she might never see. "This is Commander Chen," she said. "The Vorthan are here to finish what they started 10 years ago. They think this will be the end. They think we will finally break." She paused, and when she spoke again, her voice was iron. "They are wrong. They have been wrong about us from the beginning. They do not understand that we are not fighting because we think we can win. We are fighting because we will not stop. We cannot stop. It is not in our nature. So today we show them again. Today we make them pay for every inch they take. Today we remind them that humanity is not prey. We are the hunters, and we never ever quit." The human fleet moved forward to meet the enemy. The Battle of Proxima Station lasted 9 hours. When it was over, the human fleet was reduced to 7 ships, but the Vorthan dreadnought was destroyed, along with 5 of their destroyers. It was not a victory, not exactly, but it was not a defeat either. And that was the point. The war entered its 15th year. On Earth, a generation had grown up knowing nothing but conflict. They were harder than their parents, more determined, more willing to sacrifice. They did not remember a time when humans traveled freely among the stars. They only knew that their species was fighting for survival and that every person had a role to play. Schools taught engineering and tactics alongside reading and writing. Children learned to repair ship systems before they learned to ride bicycles. Teenagers volunteered for the fleet in numbers that amazed everyone, including the Vorthan observers who monitored human communications. "Why do they keep coming?" Krelvor asked. He was old now, even by Vorthan standards, his skin wrinkled and his movements slow. The question had consumed his life, had become an obsession that kept him awake during the long nights. He sat in an interrogation room across from a human prisoner. The human was young, barely 20 years old, with short dark hair and defiant eyes. She had been captured during a raid on a Vorthan supply convoy, one of hundreds that the humans had launched over the years. "You want to know why?" the human said. She leaned forward, her chains rattling against the table. "I'll tell you, it's because my grandfather fought you, my father fought you, and when I die my children will fight you, and their children, and their children's children. We will never stop, we will never forgive, we will never forget." Krelvor studied her face, looking for signs of doubt or fear. He found none. "You must know that you cannot win. Our technology is superior. Our numbers are greater. Your species will be extinct before ours even begins to decline." The human smiled. It was not a nice smile. "Maybe, but we'll take as many of you with us as we can. And even if you kill every last human, you'll never forget us. We'll haunt your nightmares forever. Is that what you want? Is that worth it?" She leaned back, her smile fading into something harder. "You made an enemy of humanity, and that is a mistake you will regret until the stars burn out." Krelvor had the prisoner executed. It was the merciful thing to do, he told himself. But the words stayed with him. They stayed with him when he tried to sleep. They stayed with him when he presented his reports to the council. They stayed with the entire empire. Across the galaxy, other species began to take notice. The Vorthan had ruled unchallenged for millennia. No one had ever fought back like this. No one had ever refused to surrender, no matter the cost. The humans were not winning, but they were not losing either. They were just continuing, forever, without end. Each battle cost them dearly, but they always came back. They rebuilt what was destroyed. They replaced those who fell. They adapted their tactics and improved their technology. And for the first time in 12,000 years, the Vorthan Empire began to feel something they had almost forgotten. Fear. It was a subtle thing at first, a hesitation before launching attacks, a tendency to overestimate human strength, a reluctance to pursue retreating ships too far into human space. But it grew, slowly, steadily it grew. Sarah Chen died in her sleep at the age of 81. She was not killed in battle, though she had come close many times. She simply lay down one night on the small cot in her quarters and did not wake up. Her heart, worn out from decades of stress and struggle, finally gave out. The news spread across human space within hours. Ships that were in the middle of combat paused their attacks to observe a moment of silence. Soldiers who had never met her wept as if they had lost their own grandmother. They held her funeral on Earth, in a small cemetery near the mountains where she had grown up. Thousands of people came, filling the valley and spilling onto the surrounding hills. Veterans of the fleet stood alongside civilians. Children too young to understand death placed flowers on her grave. James Okonkwo spoke at the funeral. He was in a wheelchair now, his legs lost to a Vorthan attack 3 years ago. His hands shook as he held his notes, and his voice cracked as he began to speak. "Sarah Chen was my friend," he said. "She was my commander. She was the reason I'm alive today and the reason any of us are alive. She knew from the very beginning that this war would outlast her. She knew she would not live to see the end." He looked up at the sky, where clouds were gathering, threatening rain. But she also knew that the end would come. Not today, Not tomorrow, but someday, because we do not stop, we cannot stop, and eventually they will understand that. He raised his fist, the gesture that had become the symbol of the resistance. "We're coming for you," he said quietly. "We never stopped, we never will." But the war did not stop. It could not stop. Sarah had made sure of that. Before she died, she had established the Human Resistance Command. She had created training programs, supply lines, and communication networks that could survive without any single leader. She had built an organization that would continue fighting for generations. Her legacy was not a person, it was an idea, and ideas were very hard to kill. The 25th year of the war brought a change that no one had expected. The Vorthan Empire was fracturing, not because the humans had defeated them. They had not. The Vorthans still won most battles. They still had superior technology, superior numbers, superior everything. But wars were expensive. Ships needed to be built and maintained. Soldiers needed to be trained and equipped. Resources needed to be gathered and distributed. And the war against humanity was becoming more expensive every year. Each victory cost more than the last. Each defeat hurt more than it should have. Other species that the Vorthan had conquered were watching. They were seeing that resistance was possible. They were seeing that the mighty empire was not invincible. They were starting to ask questions that had not been asked in millennia. On the Vorthan colony world of Thelos 7, a rebellion broke out. The rebels were not human. They were the Losians, a species that had been subjugated 3,000 years ago. They had been peaceful for generations, accepting their role as servants of the empire. They had been model subjects, obedient and productive. But something had changed. They had heard stories about the humans. They had seen images of human ships attacking Vorthan convoys. They had listened to intercepted transmissions, to the speeches and the slogans and the promises. Now they were fighting. They carried human weapons, smuggled in through channels that no one could trace. They used human tactics, striking quickly and retreating before the enemy could respond. They shouted human slogans as they attacked Vorthan installations. "We never stopped," they screamed. "We never will." The phrase had spread across the galaxy. It had been translated into 100 languages. It had become a symbol of defiance, a promise that the Vorthan could not ignore. On Earth, the news arrived like a gift. For the first time in a generation, humans had allies, real allies who would fight beside them. Captain Maria Santos, who had taken command of the human fleet after Sarah Chen's death, addressed her forces with tears in her eyes. "We are not alone anymore," she said. "The universe is waking up, and it is because we never gave up. Never, not once. We showed them what persistence means. We showed them that tyranny can be fought, and now, finally, others are joining us." She raised her fist. "For humanity, for freedom, for Sarah Chen, we never stop, we never will." The rebellion on Thelos 7 was crushed within 3 months. The Vorthan were efficient and ruthless, and the Losians were not prepared for the full weight of imperial power. Millions died. Cities were burned. The survivors were rounded up and executed as examples. But it did not matter, because by the time Thelos 7 fell, 2 more worlds had risen, and then 3 more, and then 10. The war was no longer just between humans and Vorthan. It was between the Empire and everyone who had ever been oppressed by it. And the humans, the species that had started it all, were at the center of it. The Vorthan tried to negotiate. They offered the humans a compromise. They would be allowed to expand within certain limits. They would be given technology and resources. All they had to do was stop fighting. The humans refused. "You don't understand," Maria Santos told the Vorthan ambassador. "This isn't about what we can get. This isn't about survival anymore. It's about what's right. You've enslaved hundreds of species. You've murdered billions of people. You don't get to offer us a deal and pretend that makes it okay." The ambassador, A young Vorthan named Krellnex, who was the grandson of Krellvor, studied her with confusion. "Then what do you want?" "We want you to fall," Maria said. "We want your empire to crumble. We want every species you've conquered to be free. And we're going to keep fighting until that happens." "That could take centuries." Maria smiled. It was the same smile that Sarah Chen had worn when she crossed the boundary, the smile of a human who had made up their mind and would never change it. "We have time," she said. The war entered its 40th year. Maria Santos was dead now, killed in the liberation of Alpha Centauri. James Okonkwo was dead too, his body finally giving out after decades of hardship. The original rebels were gone, one by one, claimed by age or battle or simple exhaustion. But their children were still fighting, and their grandchildren. Admiral Chen Weilin, the great-granddaughter of Sarah Chen, stood on the bridge of the battleship Persistence and watched as the Vorthan home fleet gathered to defend their capital world. She was 43 years old, with her great-grandmother's gray eyes and her mother's sharp mind. She had been fighting since she was 16, had commanded her first ship at 25, had become admiral at 38. The war was all she knew. It was all anyone in her generation knew. "This is it," her tactical officer said. He was a young man named Park, the great-grandson of the Park who had served with Sarah Chen. The resistance had become a family affair, with descendants serving alongside descendants, carrying on the work of their ancestors. "The final battle," he continued. "If we take the homeworld, the empire falls." Weilin shook her head. "There's no such thing as a final battle. There's just the next one, and the one after that, until we win or they do." "You really think we can win this?" Weilin looked at the tactical display. The Vorthan fleet was massive, over 1,000 ships defending their capital. The Allied fleet was smaller, only 800 vessels, a mix of human and Thelosian and Korani and a dozen other species. "I think we can't lose," she said, "because losing means giving up, and we don't do that." She turned to face her crew, the men and women who had followed her through a dozen campaigns. They were tired, they were scared, but they were also determined. "Open a channel to all Allied ships," she said. "Channel open, Admiral." "This is Admiral Chen. 40 years ago, my great-grandmother crossed a boundary that we were told we could never cross. She did it because she believed that freedom was worth fighting for, worth dying for." She paused, gathering her thoughts. "A lot of people have died since then. Humans, Thelosians, Korani, people from 100 different worlds, all fighting for the same thing. They gave their lives so that we could be here today, standing on the edge of victory." She looked at the Vorthan fleet, the last bastion of an empire that had ruled the galaxy for 12,000 years. "Today we honor them. Today we finish what they started. Today we show the universe that persistence beats power, that determination beats resources, that the will to keep fighting, no matter the cost, is the greatest weapon in existence." She raised her fist. "For the fallen, for the future, we never stop, we never will." The Allied fleet surged forward, and the battle for the Vorthan homeworld began. The battle lasted 3 days. 3 days of fire and death, of ships exploding into fragments, of lives ending in flashes of light. 47 human ships were destroyed. Over 15,000 human lives were lost. The Thelosians lost even more, and the Korani and all the others. But when it was over, the Vorthan capital was in flames, and their High Council was dead. The war was not over. It would not be over for years. There were still Vorthan holdouts, still pockets of resistance, still work to be done. But the empire was finished. Their dominion over the galaxy was ended. And it had been ended by a species they had dismissed as insects, a species they had expected to break in weeks, a species that had refused to stop, refused to surrender, refused to accept that they were beaten. The humans had not won through superior technology or greater numbers. They had won through sheer, stubborn, relentless persistence. They had won because they would not give up. And now the galaxy was free. 100 years after Sarah Chen crossed the boundary in a broken research vessel, the Galactic Alliance held its first meeting. Representatives from 200 species gathered on Earth, in a great hall built on the site of the old United Nations. The hall was filled with beings of every shape and size. Some had scales, some had feathers, some had no physical form at all, existing as patterns of light and energy. But they had all come for the same reason. They had all come to honor the species that had shown them what freedom meant. The human delegate rose to speak. His name was Thomas Chen, and he was the last living descendant of Sarah Chen's line. He was old now, 90 years, but his voice was still strong. 100 years ago, he said, the Vorthen told us to stay in our cage. They told us to accept our fate. They told us that resistance was pointless. He looked around the hall at the faces of 100 different species, each of them free, because humanity had refused to surrender. They were wrong, he said. They underestimated us. They underestimated human persistence. They thought that if they hit us hard enough, if they killed enough of us, if they showed us enough power, we would stop coming. He smiled, and it was the same smile that Sarah Chen had worn when she crossed the boundary, the same smile that her great-granddaughter had worn when she conquered the Vorthen homeworld. We never stopped, he said. We never will. That is what it means to be human. That is what it will always mean. And that is the gift we offer to the galaxy, not strength, not technology, not wisdom, just this, the promise that we will never ever give up. No matter how long it takes, no matter what it costs, we will keep coming until the end of time. The hall was silent for a long moment. Then slowly, the delegates began to rise. One by one, they stood, and they raised whatever appendages they had, and they spoke the words that had echoed across the galaxy for a century. We never stopped, we never will. It was not a war cry. It was not a threat. It was simply a truth as fundamental as gravity, as eternal as the stars. The universe had underestimated human persistence. It would never make that mistake again.